My guest today is filmmaker Liz Rao and her debut Oscar qualified short film, The Truck. Now, Academy Award winner Spike Lee and acclaimed actor director Joan Chen have boarded the coming of age thriller as executive producers, lending high profile support as the film entered post production. Now, set against the simmering anxieties of post Roe America, The Truck follows a Chinese American teenager and her boyfriend as they attempt to buy the morning after pill in a small town where reproductive rights are contested and quietly policed. Now, Liz is a Brooklyn based screenwriter and director, and The Truck world premiered at Telluride, won the Grand Jury Prize at the Oscar qualifying Florida Film Festival, and won Best Screenplay at Flickr's Rhode Island International, screening in more than 50 festivals worldwide. Now, with Lee and Chen now championing her debut, The Truck, it is positioned as one of the year's most anticipated indie breakouts, poised to ignite conversations around autonomy, identity, and the quiet horrors of coming of age in a country where choice is no longer a given. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome filmmaker Liz Rao and her Oscar qualified short film, The Truck, to the show. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, what a very polarizing subject as well as the film. But I understand that your film, The Truck, is a personal one.
It is. It came from a very personal space. When laws started changing here in America, I just had such a visceral reaction. Having grown up in Nashville and Chicago, I know what it is to live in both small towns and big towns here. And life is just so everyday life and what you have access to as a teenager is so different depending on where you live. And so when laws started changing, when Roe v. Wade fell, I started sharing my own story with friends, and I found kind of the seed of uh, this experience that is universal and that we all share. This first moment of stepping outside of teen puppy love into a world of power dynamics that are governed by adults and by laws that you're not necessarily familiar with yet. And so it's really stepping into adulthood film, set in one day in the life of a teenager and a boyfriend.
Well, what was it like growing up in Tennessee as well as Chicago? Because that's quite a contrast. And did those environments help you to shape your overall story?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's so hard to get around as a teenager without a car, um, unless you're in one of the big cities with public transportation. So, I had such an idyllic childhood, almost, pastoral, like rolling hills and farmland. And Nashville's also such a great country music hub. And so I'm so drawn to that Americana and that romantic side of American mythology. Um, and so that's always a big part of my work. Uh, at the same time, I grew up as the daughter of immigrants from southern China, and so my work always blends uh, the romanticism of Americana and also a more subtle, critical outsider's view from time to time.
Well, your film shows again, as you mentioned, the beauty of Americana, but also the perils of everyday life. Are we losing that balance here in America with basic human rights becoming too political?
In this film, I really just wanted to spark conversation, as you were saying. It was more important to me rather than, making heavy-handed political statements. I really just wanted to connect the audience with one day in this teenage couple's life. Um, for me, I can imagine that growing up now in small town America, even with access to the internet, there's still on the ground such a difference between what's legal and what's accessible, especially when it comes to contraception um, and and women's rights and access to different procedures. And so, yeah, for me, it was always about balancing what's going on now with not making it a story with a specific, political message hammering you on the head with it, but really opening people's hearts up to the story.
Well, I noticed that there were four signs in the film that had a strong Christian overtone. Some of it based on cinematography, other parts were based on scenes, such as the shot of Job passing a church in the first part of the film. She was on her bicycle, she passed it. The moment I saw it, I went, okay, that's there for a reason. Then there was the pharmacist. There was the pawn shop with many religious statues, and then the Mother Mary card hanging from the rearview mirror of the truck. Why was that messaging important, and what did you want the audiences to receive from those elements?
Yeah, again, for me, it was more about personal, lived reality as opposed to one singular message. For me, growing up in Tennessee, especially, and even in Chicago, such a Christian and very traditional place, and you feel that in every interaction, and that doesn't represent every single person's religion, but it still is the texture of that world that I grew up in. So I just wanted to bring that feeling and that backdrop that people in the bigger cities might not immediately immediately encounter in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I thought it was very, very interesting, but at the same time, I loved how it was subtle. And I think the only two elements that may not actually have been subtle was first the pharmacist. Now, she was very judgmental in her reactions, in her silence, and in a bit in not her silence, uh, because is the morning after pill considered an over-the-counter drug, or is it only obtained through the pharmacy? Because I didn't, because when both teenagers were walking down the aisle and they noticed that the space on the shelf was empty. So was that the pharmacy's uh, own move to move it behind the counter?
Yeah, great question. So technically, uh, the morning after pill is considered contraception, so it is legal for anyone to purchase. But at the same time, and this is one of the beautiful contradictions of America, there's also freedom of religion. So there are loopholes in certain places, in certain states and towns where a pharmacist or someone who's meant to provide access to the morning after pill can actually practice their own freedom of religion and not sell it to a customer.
Wow, I
So
I did not know that. That's a big eye opener there because when I was looking at the reaction of the pharmacist along with the two teenagers, does she actually represent very conservative parts of America?
I would again, I didn't mean for her to represent. I more wanted to show her as a layered character who has her own decisions to make as well and her own convictions. And so for her, practicing her freedom of religion and this religious exemption loophole is, happens to be against their objective of of getting their hands on the morning after pill. And so there really is a very human clash of ideas and missions. And she's yeah, Duval Osteen, who plays the pharmacist, was so great at bringing this, I think, Southern charm to her because that's in my encounters with people telling me no in Nashville. They never tell you to your face. It's very very hard for anyone to actually get into a conflict, but they will reserve their own judgment and tell you no in their own way.
I was wondering if with the pharmacist not actually selling to Joe, um, because she was the barrier standing between the teenagers and the morning after pill. And I kept thinking, okay, This is the way she's acting because she knows that they're teenagers. What would her reaction be if it was an adult in their 30s? What would her reaction be? Would she just turn around, take it, sell it to the person, never saying a word? And was the teenage factor a bigger factor? Because I kept thinking about that scene going, is the pharmacist judging them about having premarital sex without saying a word?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There's a lot of judgment there of them, of their relationship, of how they've gotten to that moment. So there's almost some kind of like I would say misguided like motherly intentions in a way, like trying to protect them from themselves from making a mistake. But at the same time, the pharmacist's decisions, puts them, and by extension, the laws in the first place have put these two teenagers at such risk and put them in this very vulnerable space to be then, I would say, close to being exploited by Mason, played by Garrett Richmond later on.
Yeah, that's what we're going to get to. So you add the guy with the truck. Now, now the film really becomes a bit of a thriller. So the scene inside the truck gives the audience a very, very uneasy feeling. And we have no clue as to what is going to happen. Uh, Before going further, what was the message that you wanted to convey in that whole scene inside the truck?
I was really careful in not wanting to make the film about the spectacle of trauma, and so it never gets dark to the point of being unwatchable. I wanted to push the audience just to the edge of their seats, wondering what will happen, and in order to question how they got to this situation in the first place. Should they be in such a vulnerable position when they're simply trying to get the morning after pill? And the layers of judgment and no's that went into pushing them into this. I mean, it plays almost like a drug deal. Um, and I wanted, and like a drug deal, I wanted there to be enough friendliness and layers coming from Mason, the driver, so that we would actually believe that they would get in the truck. They're in such a desperate headspace that they would trust this stranger. um, he's he is likable in some ways. I think the driver, he's kind of vulnerable himself. He puts on this music that his cousins made, and he's a lonely soul in his own ways. So I it was great. It was such a great time having Shirley and Daniel and Garrett play that scene together. We were doing long takes, and uh, it was like watching them, keep the other two on their toes at all times. It was so exciting to film.
Well, you know, I kept going back to quite a few scenes in this film, and because it's what happens after they get out of the truck. And I kept playing that scene over and over again. And I'm thinking, okay, let's back this up. So when they were so when Joe and Arash were at the pawn shop, and now it was Joe that instigated to sell their bicycles. Arash was like, "No, this is my bike." I went
Mhm.
back to that scene because after I'd watched them when they got out of the truck and what had happened there, which we'll get to, I went back to the scene with the bicycles because I'm like, wait a minute. He's not actually connected emotionally to what Joe is thinking and going through because she's kind of scared out of her wits' end, which is why she wants this pill so bad. He's more like, he's disconnected emotionally because part of him, he's still that young, innocent teenager. And here's this situation that's very adult, which is a very adult situation. And he does it, so his mind is going back, this is my bicycle. I don't want to give up my bicycle. So then
Yeah.
when, yeah, so then after the, so when they got, so when they're in the truck, then there's these other signs because that's when Mason is pushing a rash. Well, and even Joe, touch his ear, kiss her on the neck like you mean it. And there was still, I don't know if it was fear from Arash because of how Mason was acting, but also was there just this, it's trying, it's like forcing puppy love into an adult situation.
Mm. Mhm. That's a great way of putting it. I'm glad that you noticed that that they're experiencing something so different this entire journey. And I think the more pressure that's put on, the bigger the gulf between them gets. And that comes to a breaking point. She managed to get the pill, but at the price of losing the relationship in a way. And it's great that you're tracking his experience. Uh, I really wanted to have both of their experiences. He is more of a he's less mature in that way. Um, he just wants to get through the day and get home. And
Yeah,
for
he's just a typical young teenager where, it's video games, it's going to school, it's just living. But he ended up in a situation because what's weird is most people are keeping their eye on Joe. So the audience is
Mhm,
watching Joe the whole time. But really, you have to look at Arash's demeanor and how he's acting because it's almost like he's just slightly in the background, but he has a very profound role in this film. And
absolutely.
so when they got out of the truck, and then that's when that whole interaction is going on between Arash and Joe, I assumed that the hunt for the pill was caused by the fact that here are these two teenagers. So I kept thinking, okay, why is she freaking out so much? And then I'm wondering, was this the first time they either had sex or it was the first time they had unprotected sex and that's why she was freaking out?
That's a great point. Has so much more at stake than him. I think in some part in the back of his mind, he feels like maybe they do have a kid. What's the big deal? And so he just has such more lackadaisical, as you said, like approach to the whole situation. And for her, it's really a lived urgency. And I think by the end, she finds this way to step into her own adulthood and so there's a bittersweet feeling. She's lost a lot and gone through a lot in the process. And also, look where her own 2 feet and her own intelligence in some ways has brought her. She is able to pick up her own life in her own hands and define her own path forward. So I love the contrast that you noticed between the two of them, that you went back and tracked his experience of it. That's amazing.
Well,
Um,
because, Arash, he does feel her urgency to find the pill, but I think in the end he feels that it may have overshadowed the depth of their relationship. And here's the thing.
mm,
As adults, we
mhm.
can look back and think of, being young teenagers, having a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and enjoying the first time that we may have thought that we have falling in love, and this is going to be the one. But then
Exactly.
an adult situation happens and then the reality sets in. So
Exactly.
I understood where he was coming from. And people, when they see this film, need to realize that Arash is, he's not an adult. He's a young teenager. This was a puppy love kind of thing going on that entered an adult realm. But Joe's heart was broken because she felt Arash wasn't emotionally there for her. And that goes to a point that a lot of people don't realize that girls mature faster than boys, not even physically, but mentally. And
Yeah,
so
yeah, I
she
would
was,
agree.
yeah, so she was on a little higher level there. And it almost felt like, um, you know, when I watched him walk away, it was almost as if she had an abortion.
Mm.
And I
Hmm.
thought the scene was very emotional because then she was just left completely emptied with nothing. I mean, and then the
Mm.
watch when the camera moves to her, I mean, the rest of that scene with her alone is heartbreaking.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, it's the stakes are so high for her, and especially in a southern small town like that, if she hadn't gotten the morning after pill, the next step might have been searching for an abortion, and we all know that that entails, potential prison time for doctors, and that opens a whole other can of worms. So she's extremely, conscious of what's at stake for her if she doesn't manage to get the morning after pill. I think for him, it's it's almost like he takes on some of the judgment of the pharmacist by the end. Um,
Just slightly.
yeah,
He was
yeah, that
scared. He still hadn't had time to truly process the whole thing. So when he walked away in silence, he was struggling, but
he's
you
been through a
know,
lot.
yeah,
It's
and
yeah.
and I love the way you played the scene out because you had him go in one direction and you had her go in the complete opposite direction. So you created this divide, and it allows the audience to not embrace, engulf both
Mhm.
characters as to what they were going through.
Yeah, yeah, I love spending those final moments with seeing his reaction and hers. They're both just at the, like you said, after this harrowing event, just starting to process what's happened to each of them as individuals, to them as a young couple. And so whether or not they break up in that moment or if it's a few moments after that, um, it's really about how the the feeling that we're left with is, yes, she gets to forge her own path forward, but at what cost? And why was she in this vulnerable position in the first place?
Well, and if you go back to the scene in the truck, and mostly where Mason was really picking on Arash, he was picking on him more than he was picking on Joe.
Mhm.
And and at that age, guys are going to be shy. Guys are not going to be outwardly showing affection, per se.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that scene too also played into the fact that when they got out of the truck, because that was heavily on his mind. So Arash was weighing two different things. He was weighing on how he got treated by Mason, and then he is looking at the whole situation of how the whole day went, and trying to find this pill. So that I really felt sorry for him.
It was great when I screened this and when we got to the end, to Spike Lee, he was shouting at the screen. He was laughing throughout at the right moments, but at the end, he was like talking to Joe as a character. He was like, "You could do better. You could do better." Yeah, it's been a really great journey. The actors are just fantastic. I tend to look at my writing. Um, I wrote the screenplay with co-writer Jonathan Fred Schneider, um, and I tend to look at screenplays as roadmaps for the actors to play. So the dialogue was very carefully scripted, but there were specific moments that we invited them to improvise and bring their own naturalistic selves. And so I just got so lucky with them and the whole team. It was just such a great production experience, which I can't say for every production I've been
Yeah.
on.
Well, how did you cast Shirley, Daniel, and Garrett?
Yeah, we worked with really fantastic casting directors who had seen Shirley and Daniel in their own respective feature films. Shirley had been in Beast Beast, the lead, and also in Dee Dee, and Daniel had led Funny Pages, and so we were really lucky to get them on the truck on the short film. And they actually met for the first time the day before we filmed. Uh, First day, first scene was the opening bedroom in bed scene. So it was really great just seeing them react to each other the whole time. It was just so natural and realistic.
So, what has been the audience's reaction who have seen the film at film festivals?
Yeah, it's been great. People have come up to me, even high schoolers, a few high schoolers at Telluride, sharing with me, opening up about their own encounters with power dynamics. Particularly around the morning after pill, but also other forms of reproductive rights. And so it's just been so moving to me to get to hear their stories, but also to start conversations for them and amongst their friends and just get a conversation started. Because I think I realized in the making of it that it is such a universal experience, this specific moment. Uh,
So, this film is interesting, and I see films like this, and it always um, it always interests me as to what type of questions and reactions that you get from, of course, I pretty much know the reactions you're going to get in America. What's been the reaction to other global audiences in other countries?
it's funny, we just had a screening in London, but also we've had actually maybe 7 festival screenings in the UK. And I think they really connect to this, I would say, like, conflict averse way of dealing with things. It's really, really important. I think there's something shared in the culture in the UK and in the South. I think there's this politeness and hospitality in a way that's of utmost importance when you're interacting with people. Um, and yeah, universally, I think and in Europe especially, people have been surprised that this is still going on in America. Um, and so it's been good to shed light uh, on a story close to my heart, set in the American South, but um, from this kind of hybrid, uh, local but somewhat outsider's perspective at the same time.
Yeah, and and I love the fact that film, especially short film, is so global that so many different countries, cultures can uh, share, share what's going on in their own country on so many different levels. So that's the reason I just love this genre so much. Now,
Me too.
Spike Lee and Joan Chen have come aboard as executive producers. Now, did they come aboard early or once you were Oscar qualified?
Yeah, I showed it to them after we were already Oscar qualified. They had I screened it for Spike and I had shared a link with Joan, and I'm just so, I was very nervous to share the link with share with the film with them. and was so happily surprised that they were eager to lend their voices to support the film, to support the subject matter. And my hope is that this will get the film seen by as many people as possible.
Now, did you learn film under Spike Lee?
I did, yeah. I actually have been, he's been mentoring my feature film screenplay, my debut feature. And so that's how I came to know him a bit better. And he's just been so incredibly supportive and generous with his time and lending his voice.
Wow. You know, when this was sent to me and I saw Spike Lee's name, because he definitely stands alone when it comes to be
Absolutely.
a film director. I think the only two that to me really stand alone amongst all the A-list directors out there would be Spike Lee and Quentin Tarantino. They're
Mm,
their own.
their own world, yeah.
Yeah, and we need that. We gotta have people that are so different that they don't keep bringing us the same things. And so I just found it so amazing. I'm like, wow, she learned under Spike Lee. That's a pretty cool deal.
Absolutely. And I think they also open a portal into experiencing things in new communities that we haven't seen on screen. And Do the Right Thing is still my compass, that balance between this explosive and interesting subject matter we've never seen before done quite that way. And it's so entertaining and compelling, and all the characters are so layered, that you just want to be a part of their world, and you feel like you're in the room with them, going through it with them. And so that's a balance that Spike is helping me strike in my feature as well.
I think it was Spike Lee that was one of, if not the first, to use a digital camera for a feature film. And that has opened up a whole new portal. And what's it been now? Maybe 20 years now, at least.
Yeah, I hadn't realized about the digital camera, but that would make sense. He's such a pioneer in so many ways.
Yeah. But again, this is a very, very powerful film. And so, what would you like audiences to take away after seeing it?
I would love for audiences, if they resonate with the film, just to share and to share the film, but also share their own experiences with one another. I think it's so important to have conversation and dialogue around these more taboo subjects like the morning after pill and abortion. And um, for me, I grew up not only in the South and in the Midwest, but also in this immigrant family. And my parents never wanted to talk about romance or crushes or, God forbid, sex. And so when there's a culture of silence, I think um, problems and exploitation is really magnified. But if we can just talk about it, then I really do hope that some small amount of impact can be made by the film.
Yeah, I think you're going to make a very, very big impact with this film. And ladies and gentlemen, the truck is tense, it's emotional, and can be somewhat polarizing in a landscape that is constantly changing in America. Now, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on in America, we are still dishing out judgment, even racism, across our country. Now, the simple act of looking for the morning after pill can make some people feel that they're wearing a scarlet letter, and this topic isn't going away anytime soon. This film, as I have watched it, is multi-layered, so I can tell that Liz has picked up quite a bit from Academy Award winner Spike Lee. And Liz, you have a very powerful film, one that reaches into the heart of America today, and much success to you and your team on your Oscar journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been
You're
wonderful
very
speaking with you.
And ladies and gentlemen, The Truck is available on Vimeo's. It's a staff pick on their premiere, and check it out now. You're going to be like me. You're going to watch this film with a different eye after watching this interview with Liz, and you're going to see excellent filmmaking uh, in this short, The Truck, and no wonder it's Oscar qualified. And ladies and gentlemen, again, you can catch all of the Bond on Cinema interviews at bondoncinema.com. Check out our Prime Show, our YouTube channel, and you can listen to us on Spotify, iTunes, Audible, and more. And remember, you'll either see me at the movies or from the red carpet.